The space around the human fleet was filled with static and broken voices. Commander Hannah Kim had been monitoring the communication channels for hours when suddenly a new signal broke through all the noise. This wasn't the usual trading requests or diplomatic messages that crossed between star systems. This was something else entirely. The voice that came through the speakers was shaking with fear. Hannah could hear explosions in the background and what sounded like buildings collapsing. She quickly activated the translation software and watched as alien words turned into something she could understand. What she read made her blood run cold. The Zilani were dying. Their beautiful blue planet, famous across the galaxy for its incredible art and wise philosophers, was under attack. The Korthok Empire had arrived 3 days ago with hundreds of warships and had been bombing every major city since then. Millions of innocent people were trapped with nowhere to run. Hannah had heard stories about the Zilani people. They were gentle beings who had never hurt anyone. Cities were filled with museums and libraries instead of military bases. They created beautiful sculptures that could make even the toughest space trader cry. They wrote poetry that spoke about peace and understanding between all living things. The idea that someone would want to destroy them seemed impossible to believe. The Korthok Empire was different. They were known throughout the galaxy as destroyers and slavers. Wherever they went, free worlds became prison planets. They took everything valuable and left nothing but ash and chains behind. For 300 years, they had been growing stronger. While other species lived in fear of becoming their next target, Hannah pressed the emergency button on her control panel. Red lights flashed throughout the ship as alarms sounded. Within seconds, Admiral Jinwoo Park was running onto the bridge, still putting on his uniform jacket. Park was a man who had seen combat on dozens of worlds, but Hannah had never seen him look this serious before. "What's the situation?" Park asked as he took his position at the command center. Hannah played the message again. They both listened to the desperate voice of someone who knew they might be speaking their last words. The Zilani leader was begging anyone who could hear the transmission to come and help them. They weren't asking for money or trade deals. They just wanted someone to care enough to try. When the message ended, the bridge was completely silent. Everyone knew what this meant. The Zilani homeworld was located in the Outer Rim, a dangerous part of space where few ships dared to travel. It would take days to reach them, and by then, it might be too late. Even if they could get there in time, the Korthok fleet was enormous. Any rescue mission would be suicide. Admiral Park stared at the star map, showing the location of the Zilani system. His hands were clenched into fists as he thought about innocent families being hunted through their own streets. Communications officer Minho Choi was monitoring other channels, hoping to hear that someone else would respond to the call for help. Sir Minho reported quietly, "The Galactic Council is discussing the situation, but they're not planning to take action. The other major species are calling it an internal matter. Say the risk is too great for the potential benefit." Park's jaw tightened. He had expected this response. Most alien species in the galaxy were cautious by nature. They preferred to avoid conflicts that didn't directly threaten their own worlds. Humans were different. They had a harder time ignoring the suffering of others, even when helping meant putting themselves in danger. Minnow Admiral Park said in a voice that everyone on the bridge could hear clearly, "Send an immediate message to Earth Fleet Command. Tell them we are responding to the Zilani distress call. Request permission to mobilize every available ship." In our sector, the communications officer's eyes went wide. What the Admiral was suggesting would mean taking nearly every human warship away from their normal duties. If something went wrong, Earth's outer colonies would be left undefended. But as Minho looked at the tactical display showing the location of the dying Zilani world, he understood why this decision had to be made. Within minutes, the response came back from Earth. Fleet Command had authorized the largest military operation in human history. They were really going to try to save a species they had never even met before. The sight was incredible. Captain Yuna Lee had served in the human fleet for 12 years, but she had never seen anything like this before. 57 warships stretched out in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. These weren't the sleek, elegant vessels that other alien races preferred. Human ships looked different. They were built thick and strong, covered in extra armor plating and reinforced steel beams. Every ship told a story. The UES Thunder, where Captain Lee stood on the bridge, had deep scratches along its side from fighting space pirates near the asteroid belt. The massive dreadnought US Hammer showed burn marks from when it had flown too close to a solar flare while rescuing miners on Mercury. These ships had been tested in the most dangerous places in the galaxy, and they had survived everything space could throw at them. Navigation Officer Sun Ho Choi was busy calculating their route to the Zolani homeworld. His fingers moved quickly across the control panel as he checked fuel levels, engine capacity, and hyperspace coordinates. The journey they were about to take would push every system to its limits. Most alien ships wouldn't even attempt such. A dangerous trip, but human vessels were built for exactly this kind of mission. "The other species are calling us crazy," reported Communications Officer Minho from the flagship.
Oh.
The Altarian Council sent a formal message saying this mission is impossible. The Vegan Republic wishes us luck but won't be joining us. Even our allies think we're making a mistake. Admiral Park listened to these reports without showing any emotion. He had expected this reaction. Throughout galactic history, humans had gained a reputation for doing things that other species considered insane. When most aliens encountered a dangerous situation, their first instinct was to find a safe way around it. When humans faced the same problem, they usually charged straight through it. The reason for this difference was simple. Earth was what galactic scientists called a death world. It was a planet where everything seemed designed to kill anything that lived there. Massive storms that could level entire cities, earthquakes that could split mountains in half, volcanoes that could cover half a continent in ash, wild animals that could tear through metal with their claws. Even the weather was trying to kill you most of the time. Growing up on such a hostile world had shaped human thinking in ways that other species found difficult to understand. While alien children learned to avoid danger, human children learned to face it head-on, while other species developed technology to keep them safe and comfortable. Humans built machines that could survive in the harshest environments imaginable. This difference in thinking showed up everywhere. Alien military tactics focused on careful planning and avoiding casualties. Human tactics involved finding the most direct path to victory, even if it meant taking heavy risks. Other species built their cities in the safest possible locations. Humans built cities anywhere they wanted and then figured out how to make them work, Captain. Una Lee looked around her bridge at the crew, preparing for the hyperspace jump. These men and women had grown up playing in radiation zones that would kill most aliens in minutes. They had learned to drive vehicles through storms that could flip over buildings. They considered a day without some kind of life-threatening challenge to be boring. Engine status report. Captain Lee called to her engineering team. "All systems running at optimal levels," came the reply. "We're ready to push these engines harder than they've ever been pushed before. Weapons systems fully loaded and calibrated. Every gun on every ship is ready for combat. Medical teams standing by. We've got enough supplies to treat casualties from a major battle." Admiral Park's voice echoed through the communication system, reaching every person on every ship in the fleet. "Today we're going to do something that most of the galaxy thinks is impossible. We're going to travel to a distant system, fight an enemy that outnumbers us 10 to 1. And rescue a species that most people have already written off as doomed." The Admiral paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "The reason we can do this is simple. We're human. We don't know how to give up. We don't know how to back down. And we sure don't know how to ignore people who need our help." Every person in the fleet felt a surge of pride at those words. What's who they were? What's what made them different? From every other species in the galaxy, all ships prepare for hyperspace jump. We have people to save. The moment the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, every person on every bridge fell silent. What they saw was heartbreaking. Dozens of damaged alien ships drifted through space like wounded birds trying to stay in the air. These vessels had once been beautiful, with smooth curves and artistic designs that showed the peaceful nature of their builders. Now they were covered in burn marks and holes from enemy weapons. "Captain," Una Lee watched through her view screen as one of the larger refugee ships slowly spun out of control. Its engines were dead, and she could see atmosphere leaking from multiple hull breaches. Without thinking, she immediately ordered her crew to prepare rescue shuttles. This was what humans did when they saw someone in trouble. Dr. Mingy Han was already setting up emergency medical stations throughout the UES Thunder. She had studied alien biology during her training, but she had never actually treated non-human patients before. As the first group of Zilani refugees was brought aboard, she got her first close look at the species they had come to save. The Zilani were unlike anything she had expected. They stood almost 7 feet tall, but moved with incredible grace, like dancers performing an endless ballet. Their skin was a soft blue color that seemed to shimmer in the ship's lights. Most striking were their eyes, which were twice the size of human eyes, and filled with an intelligence that spoke of thousands of years of civilization. But these eyes also held something else now: fear, pain, the kind of deep exhaustion that comes from running for your life for days without rest. Many of the refugees had injuries that Dr. Han had never seen before. Burns from energy weapons, cuts from metal debris. Some were suffering from starvation because they had been giving their food to their children. As Dr. Han worked to treat their wounds, she began to understand just how terrible the Korthok attack had been. The refugees spoke in whispers about families torn apart, about beautiful cities reduced to rubble, about friends who had stayed behind to help others escape and were probably dead now. Elder Vixtai was the leader of the refugee group. He was old even by Zilani standards, with skin that had turned a deeper blue with age and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had lived through many difficulties. When Commander Hannah Kim introduced herself, the elder stared at her for a long moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You actually came," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "When we sent out the distress call, we hoped someone might hear us, but we never expected anyone to actually respond." "Commander." Kim found this reaction puzzling. Why wouldn't someone respond? "You were in trouble and asked for help." The elder's expression became sad. Most species in the galaxy prefer to avoid conflict. They calculate the risks and decide that helping strangers isn't worth the danger. To themselves, we understood this, just hoped that maybe someone would feel differently. "Well, you found someone," Kim replied. "Humans don't really know how to ignore a call for help." Elder Vextai looked around at the human crew members who were working to make his people comfortable. They were offering food, blankets, medical care, and reassurance without asking for anything in return. "We have heard stories about your species," he said quietly. "Other races call you Deathworlders because you come from such a dangerous planet. Many find you frightening." "And what do you think?" Kim asked. The elder watched as a human medic knelt down to comfort a scared Zilani child, speaking softly and offering a small toy from his own pocket. "I think you are exactly what the galaxy needs," he said. Lieutenant Junho Nam had been conducting sensor sweeps of the Zilani home system while the rescue operations continued. What his scanners revealed made him feel sick to his stomach. The Korthok weren't just occupying the planet. They were systematically destroying everything that made Zilani's civilization special. "Admiral," he reported to Park over the communication system, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. It looks like they're using industrial mining equipment to tear down the major cities. The cultural centers, the art museums, the libraries, they're all being demolished." Admiral Park's hands clenched into fists as he listened to the report. The Korthak weren't just conquering the Zilani. They were trying to erase them completely. Every beautiful building, every work of art, every piece of history was being destroyed simply because it represented something the Korthak couldn't control. "What about survivors?" Park asked. "I'm detecting large groups of people being moved to what look like containment facilities," Nam replied. "Based on the energy patterns, I'd guess they're being used as forced labor." The Admiral closed his eyes for a moment. He had seen this kind of thing before in human history, and he had hoped the galaxy might be better than that. Apparently, some things were the same no matter what planet you came from. "Keep monitoring the situation," Park ordered, and prepare detailed tactical analysis. "We're going to need to know exactly what we're up against." Major Soyoung Kang had volunteered. For the most dangerous mission of her military career, her small scout ship was barely larger than a fighter, built for speed and stealth rather than combat. She had spent the last 6 hours slowly moving through the asteroid field that surrounded the Zilani homeworld, using the floating rocks as cover while she observed what the second were doing to the planet below. What she saw through her high-powered telescopes made her feel sick. The Korthak weren't just conquering the Zilani people. They were deliberately destroying everything. That made their civilization beautiful and unique. Ancient temples that had stood for thousands of years were being used for target practice by Korthak soldiers. Museums filled with priceless artwork were being converted into military barracks, with soldiers sleeping on beds made from destroyed sculptures. "This is definitely being recorded," Major Kang whispered into her communication device as she zoomed in on the planet's largest city. "Admiral, what I'm seeing down there isn't military occupation, it's cultural genocide. They're trying to erase every trace of Zilani history." The images she transmitted back to the fleet showed scenes that would haunt everyone who saw them. Beautiful gardens that had taken centuries to grow were being burned to make room for military equipment. Libraries containing millions of years of Zilani knowledge were being emptied, with books and scrolls thrown into massive fires. Even the distinctive architecture that made Zilani cities so elegant was being systematically demolished and replaced with ugly concrete bunkers. But the worst part wasn't what the Korthak were doing to buildings and artifacts. It was what they were doing to the people. Major Kong's cameras captured images of long lines of Zilani, civilians being marched into what could only be described as prison camps. Families were being separated, with children taken to different facilities than their parents. The graceful, artistic people who had created such beauty were being forced to work in mines and factories, building weapons for their own oppressors. Captain Yunali watched these transmissions from her position on the EU's Thunder, and with each new image, her anger grew stronger. She had studied military history during her training, and she recognized what she was seeing. This wasn't just conquest. This was a deliberate attempt to break the spirit of an entire species by destroying everything they cared about. "How long have they been doing this?" she asked over the communication channel. "Based on the level of destruction, I'd estimate they started the cultural demolition within hours of taking control of the planet," Major Kong replied. "This wasn't something they decided to do later. This was part of their original plan." The tactical situation was even worse than the cultural destruction. Ensign Dojeon Seo was fresh out of the Space Academy, and this was his first real combat assignment. He had been trained to analyze enemy defenses, but nothing in his education had prepared him for what he was seeing on his scanner displays. "Ma'am," he said to Captain Lee, his voice shaking slightly, "the Korthak have turned this entire system into a fortress. They've got orbital defense platforms positioned in a perfect grid around the planet. Each platform has enough firepower to destroy a cruiser, and they're positioned so that their weapons coverage overlaps. Any ship trying to approach the planet would be under fire from at least 3 platforms at all times." Captain Lee studied the tactical display that Ensign Seo had created. The defensive setup was brilliant in its simplicity. The Korthak had learned from centuries of conquest, and they knew exactly how to protect their prizes from rescue attempts. "What about their fleet?" she asked. Ensign Seo swallowed hard before answering. "Conservative estimate puts them at 600 combat vessels. That includes everything from small patrol boats to massive battleships. They've got the planet surrounded in 3 defensive layers, with the strongest ships closest to the surface." The numbers were staggering. The human fleet had brought 57 ships to face an enemy force that was more than 10 times larger. Any reasonable military commander would look at these odds and immediately retreat. But humans had a different definition of reasonable than most species. Admiral Park listened to all these reports with the same calm expression he always wore during briefings. When the last piece of intelligence had been transmitted, he was quiet for several minutes while he considered their options. Everyone on every ship in the fleet waited to hear what their commander would decide. "Major Kang," he finally said, "how long can you maintain your position without being detected?" "Maybe 12 more hours if I'm careful," she replied. "Good. Keep watching and recording everything. I want to know their patrol schedules, their shift changes, and any weaknesses in their defensive pattern." Admiral Park then opened a channel to address his entire fleet. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be honest with you. What we're facing down there is the worst kind of enemy. They're not just trying to win a war, they're trying to destroy everything, good and decent, about the people they've conquered. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The odds against us are terrible. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and attacking a heavily fortified position. Any sane military force would retreat and wait for reinforcements. Another pause. Fortunately for the Zilani people, humans stopped being sane a long time ago. We're going to get those people out of there, and we're going to make sure that Korthok regret ever hearing the name of our species. Major Soyoung Kong had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of her military career. Her small scout ship was barely larger than a fighter, built for speed and stealth rather than combat. She had spent the last 6 hours slowly moving through the asteroid field that surrounded the Zilani homeworld, using the floating rocks as cover while she observed what the Korthok were doing to the planet below. What she saw through her high-powered telescopes made her feel sick. The Korthok weren't just conquering the Zilani people. They were deliberately destroying everything that made their civilization beautiful and unique. Ancient temples that had stood for thousands of years were being used for target practice by Korthok soldiers. Museums filled with priceless artwork were being converted into military barracks. With soldiers sleeping on beds made from destroyed sculptures, this is definitely being recorded. Major Kong whispered into her communication device as she zoomed in on the planet's largest city. Admiral, what I'm seeing down there isn't military occupation, it's cultural genocide. They're trying to erase every trace of Zilani history. The images she transmitted back to the fleet showed scenes that would haunt everyone who saw them. Beautiful gardens that had taken centuries to grow were being burned to make room for military equipment. Libraries containing millions of years of Zilani knowledge were being emptied, with books and scrolls thrown into massive fires. Even the distinctive architecture that made Zilani cities so elegant was being systematically demolished and replaced with ugly concrete bunkers. But the worst part wasn't what the Korthok were doing to buildings and artifacts. It was what they were doing to the people. Major Kong's cameras captured images of long lines of Zilani, civilians being marched into what could only be described as prison camps. Families were being separated, with children taken to different facilities than their parents. The graceful, artistic people who had created such beauty were being forced to work in mines and factories, building weapons for their own oppressors. Captain Yuna Lee watched these transmissions from her position on the Yu's Thunder, and with each new image, her anger grew stronger. She had studied military history during her training, and she recognized what she was seeing. This wasn't just conquest. This was a deliberate attempt to break the spirit of an entire species by destroying everything they cared about. How long have they been doing this? She asked over the communication channel. Based on the level of destruction, I'd estimate they started the cultural demolition within hours of taking control of the planet, Major Kong replied. This wasn't something they decided to do later. This was part of their original plan. The tactical situation was even worse than the cultural destruction. Ensign Do Jansu was fresh out of the Space Academy, and this was his first real combat assignment. He had been trained to analyze enemy defenses, but nothing in his education had prepared him for what he was seeing on his scanner displays. "Ma'am," he said to Captain Lee, his voice shaking slightly, "the Korthok have turned this entire system into a fortress. They've got orbital defense platforms positioned in a perfect grid around the planet. Each platform has enough firepower to destroy a cruiser, and they're positioned so that their weapons coverage overlaps. Any ship trying to approach the planet would be under fire from at least 3 platforms at all times." Captain Lee studied the tactical display that Ensign SEO had created. The defensive setup was brilliant in its simplicity. The Korthok had learned from centuries of conquest, and they knew exactly how to protect their prizes from rescue attempts. "What about their fleet?" she asked. Ensign SEO swallowed hard before answering. "Conservative estimate puts them at 600 combat vessels. That includes everything from small patrol boats to massive battleships. They've got the planet surrounded in 3 defensive layers, with the strongest ships closest to the surface. Numbers were staggering. Human fleet had brought 57 ships to face an enemy force that was more than 10 times larger. Any reasonable military commander would look at these odds and immediately retreat. But humans had a different definition of reasonable than most species. Admiral Park listened to all these reports with the same calm expression, always wore during briefings. When the last piece of intelligence had been transmitted, he was quiet. For several minutes, while he considered their options, everyone on every ship in the fleet waited to hear what their commander would decide. "Major Kang," he finally said, "how long can you maintain your position without being detected?" "Maybe 12 more hours if I'm careful," she replied. "Good. Keep watching and recording everything. I want to know their patrol schedules, their shift changes, and any weaknesses in their defensive pattern." Admiral Park then opened a channel to address his entire fleet. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be honest with you. What we're facing down there is the worst kind of enemy. They're not just trying to win a war. They're trying to destroy everything good and decent about the people they've conquered." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "The odds against us are terrible. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and attacking a heavily fortified position. Any sane military force would retreat and wait for reinforcements." Another pause. "Fortunately for the Zilani people, humans stopped being sane a long time ago. We're going to get those people out of there, and we're going to make sure the Korthok regret ever hearing the name of our species." The main briefing room on the EU's Valor had been converted into a war planning center. Holographic displays filled every available space, showing detailed maps of the Zilani system, enemy ship positions, and defensive installations. The blue glow from the projectors cast strange shadows on the faces of the officers gathered around the central table, making everyone look tired and grim. Colonel Hyenwu Lim had been studying military tactics for 20 years, and he had never seen a defensive position this strong. Korthok had positioned their ships in perfect formation, creating overlapping fields of fire that would destroy any attacking force long before it could reach the planet. Their orbital platforms were placed with mathematical precision, ensuring that no ship could approach from any angle without being targeted by multiple weapon systems. Captain Yuna Lee was running combat simulations on the tactical computer, trying to find some weakness in the enemy formation. She had run the same attack scenario 37 times, adjusting variables like approach speed, formation patterns, and timing. Every single simulation ended the same way. The human fleet was completely destroyed before it could inflict any meaningful damage on the enemy. "The numbers just don't work in our favor," reported Intelligence Officer Sion Park as she highlighted different sections of the enemy formation. "Their smallest ships are cruisers that outgun our destroyers. Their largest ships are dreadnoughts that could probably take on our entire fleet by themselves. And that's not even counting the orbital defense platforms." She pulled up a detailed analysis of Korthok military technology. "Their shields are powered by reactors that are twice as efficient as ours. Their weapons have longer range and hit harder than anything we've got. They've also had 3 months to fortify their positions and prepare for exactly this kind of rescue attempt." Admiral Park listened to these reports without showing any emotion. His officers had seen this expression before during some of the most dangerous battles in human military history. It was the look of a commander who was about to make a decision that would either save lives or get everyone killed. The holographic display showed the current tactical situation in painful detail. 600 Korthok ships arranged in 3 defensive layers around the planet, orbital weapons platforms covering every possible approach route, enemy patrol schedules that ensured constant surveillance of the surrounding space. It was the kind of defensive setup that military textbooks would describe as impregnable. "Sir," said Commander Hannah Kim, speaking carefully, "I have to recommend tactical withdrawal. We could evacuate the refugees we've already rescued and return to Earth space to request reinforcements. With a larger fleet, we might have a chance of success." Admiral Park considered this suggestion for a moment. How long would it take to assemble a force large enough to break through these defenses? "Conservative estimate would be 8 months, Kim replied. "We'd need to pull ships from every sector of human space, and even then we'd probably need to request assistance from our alien allies." The Admiral turned to look at the image of the Zilani homeworld that dominated the center display. Even from Space, they could see the fires burning in what had once been beautiful cities. Smoke clouds covered large sections of the continents, and the orbital cameras were picking up the heat signatures of massive industrial operations where the Korthok were forcing their prisoners to work. 8 months, Park repeated quietly. In 8 months, how many Zilani do you think will still be alive? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Based on what? They had observed of Korthok methods, the peaceful Zilani people would be completely broken as a civilization within a few weeks. Those who survived the labor camps would be so traumatized and scattered that their culture might never recover. The Zilani don't have 8 months, Admiral Park continued, his voice growing stronger. They don't have 8 weeks. At the rate the Korthok are working, they might not even have 8 days before their entire civilization is destroyed forever. He stood up and walked around the table, looking each of his officers in the eye. What they have right now is us. 57. Ships and the crews who volunteer to serve on them. That's going to have to be enough. Captain Unilee felt her heart racing as she realized what the Admiral was planning. Sir, are we really going to attack a position like this? We're talking about charging a fortified enemy with inferior numbers? In firepower? Tactical computers are calling this a suicide mission. Admiral Park's expression didn't change. Yes, Captain. We are going to attack. And do you know why? Why, sir? Because that's what humans do. When someone needs help, and nobody else is willing to provide it, humans step forward. When the odds are impossible and victory seems hopeless, humans find a way to fight anyway. When choosing between our own safety and doing what's right, humans choose to do what's right. The Admiral activated the ship-wide communication system so that every person in the fleet could hear his words. 300 years ago, our ancestors faced impossible odds when they decided to explore space. Everyone said it was too dangerous, too expensive, too difficult. But they did it anyway, and that's why we're here today. He paused, letting his words reach every corner of every ship. Today we face impossible odds again. We're outnumbered and outgunned by an enemy that has never been defeated. But down on that planet are people who need our help, and nobody else is coming to save them. So we're going to do what humans have always done when faced with impossible situations. We're going to find a way to make the impossible happen. The attack began before dawn on the Zilani homeworld, but in the darkness of space, time meant nothing. Captain Unilee gripped her command chair as the UES Thunder accelerated toward the enemy fleet at speeds that would have torn apart most alien vessels. Her ship was built differently than the elegant craft preferred by other species. It was thick, heavily armored, and designed to survive in conditions that would destroy anything else in the galaxy. Remember, she called to her crew over the ship's intercom? We're not trying to fight fair. We're trying to win fast and save lives. Use every dirty trick you know. The human fleet approached the Korthok formation in a way that confused the enemy commanders completely. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, the human ships dove straight into the heart of the defensive grid. Captain Lee's destroyer used the planet's gravity to accelerate even faster, slingshotting around the world like a stone from a catapult. The Korthok had spent centuries perfecting their defensive tactics. They expected enemy fleets to approach slowly and carefully, trying to minimize damage while gradually wearing down their defenses. What they got instead was 57 ships, charging directly at them like wild animals attacking a hunter. Impact in 30 seconds, reported Navigation Officer Sun Ho Choi as the Thunder raced toward the enemy line. All weapons ready for close-range combat. The first Korthok cruiser that opened fire on them seemed shocked when the human destroyer didn't try to avoid the incoming energy beams. Instead, Captain Lee ordered her ship to fly directly through the weapons fire, absorbing hits that would have crippled most vessels. The Thunder's hull was scarred and blackened, but it kept flying. All guns, point-blank range. Captain Lee shouted as her ship smashed through the Korthok defensive line like a hammer through glass. The alien crews, trained for careful long-distance battles, suddenly found themselves in a close-quarters fight with beings who seemed to enjoy the chaos. The UES. Thunder's weapons fired continuously as it carved through the enemy formation. Human gunners, trained to hit fast-moving targets in asteroid fields, had no trouble tracking enemy ships at close range. Within minutes, 3 Korthok vessels were disabled or destroyed, their crews unable to adapt to this new style of combat. Major Soyang Kong was leading a squadron of smaller ships in an attack on the orbital defense platforms. These massive weapon stations were supposed to be untouchable, protected by overlapping shields and positioned too far apart for any coordinated assault. But Major Kong had grown up flying through the debris fields around Earth's moon, where one wrong move could send you crashing into a chunk of rock moving at thousands of miles per hour. "Follow my lead," she transmitted to her squadron. "We're going to thread the needle." What happened next would have been impossible for most alien pilots. The human squadron executed a coordinated barrel roll through a debris field at 3/4 light speed, using chunks of destroyed ships as cover while they approached the orbital platforms. Each pilot had to calculate the movement of dozens of pieces of wreckage while maintaining formation and avoiding enemy fire. The Korthok gunners tried to track the attacking ships, but the humans were moving too fast and too unpredictably. One moment a human fighter would be visible, the next it would disappear behind a piece of debris, only to emerge from a completely different angle with all weapons firing. "This is impossible," screamed one of the Korthok platform commanders over the emergency communication channel. "How are they flying through that debris field without getting killed?" The answer was simple. Human pilots learned to fly in conditions that would terrify most species. They practiced in asteroid belts, solar storms, and gravitational anomalies that other races avoided completely. Flying through a debris field while under fire was just another day at the office for them. Admiral Park's flagship, the Use Valor, was leading the main assault against the largest Korthok ships. The admiral had decided that the best way to break the enemy formation was to destroy their command vessels, and he was willing to use his own ship as a battering ram to make it happen. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Minho Choi, "the Korthok fleet commander is demanding to know why we're fighting like this. He says ramming attacks went out of style 1,000 years ago." Admiral Park smiled grimly as his ship's reinforced prow smashed through the hull of a Korthok cruiser. "Tell him that humans never got that message. The Valar was built like a fortress that could fly. Its front section was designed to punch through asteroid belts and solar radiation storms. Using it to ram enemy ships was unconventional, but it was also devastatingly effective. The Korthok vessels, built for elegance and long-range combat, simply couldn't withstand the brutal impact of a ship designed to survive in Earth's hostile solar system. Throughout the battle, human ships fought with a combination of precision and violence that left the Korthok fleet completely unprepared. They had faced many different species over their centuries of conquest, but they had never encountered anyone who fought like this. "Sir," reported Minho Choi, his voice filled with excitement, "enemy fleet is beginning to break formation. Several ships are retreating to higher orbit." Admiral Park watched as the carefully organized Korthok defensive grid started to collapse under the human assault. "Good. Signal the Marines. Tell them it's time for Phase 2. The dropships screamed through the Zalani atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing bright orange from the heat of atmospheric entry. Inside the lead transport, Sergeant Major Yoon Bishin felt the familiar vibration of a combat drop and smiled grimly. She had done this dozens of times on different worlds, but never with stakes this high. Around her, 30 Marines checked their weapons and equipment one final time. These weren't fresh recruits looking for adventure. These were hardened veterans who had fought in the worst conditions the galaxy could offer. They had battled pirates in the asteroid belts, raiders in the ice fields of Europa, and rebels in the toxic swamps of Titan. Each one had earned their place through years of training in environments that would kill most alien species. "Listen up, Sergeant Major," Shin called over the roar of atmospheric entry. "The Korthok have been bullying peaceful species for 300 years. They're used to fighting enemies who surrender when things get difficult. Today they're going to learn what happens when they pick a fight with someone who doesn't know how to quit." The transport shook violently as enemy surface-to-air missiles exploded nearby. But the human dropships were built to survive much worse. They had been designed to land on worlds with active volcanoes, toxic atmospheres, and extreme weather conditions. A few enemy missiles weren't going to stop them from reaching their target. Staff Sergeant Kyun Minho was leading the first assault team against the largest prisoner camp on the continent. As his dropship touched down, he was already moving toward the exit ramp with his squad behind him. The Korthok guards at the camp were expecting an easy day of intimidating helpless prisoners. What they got instead was a squad of human marines, in powered armor, charging through their defensive positions like an unstoppable force of nature. The Zilani homeworld was a challenging environment even under normal circumstances. The planet had an atmosphere that was barely breathable for most species, with high levels of sulfur compounds that would make alien soldiers sick within hours. The surface was dotted with active volcanoes and geothermal vents that created constant environmental hazards. For humans, it felt like a mild vacation compared to Earth. "Perimeter secured," reported Staff Sergeant Uno, as his squad methodically eliminated the guard towers around the camp, beginning civilian evacuation procedures. The Korthok had designed their prison camps to break the spirits of their captives. The facilities were deliberately uncomfortable, with poor sanitation, inadequate food, and constant noise designed to prevent sleep. Families had been separated, with children kept in different sections from their parents. The goal was to make the prisoners so miserable that they would do anything to make their suffering stop. Corporal Sujin Young was the first to reach the children's section of the camp. When she broke down the door, she found dozens of young Zilani, huddled together in a single room, their large eyes wide with fear. They had been told that monsters would come to hurt them if they didn't obey their captors. "It's okay, Corporal," Yang said softly, kneeling down to their level and activating her translator. We're here to help you. We're going to take you back to your families." The children stared at her in amazement. They had never seen a human before, but somehow they understood that these strangers were different from their captors. These beings radiated a sense of protection and care that the Zilani children instinctively recognized. Private Hyunwoo Kim was fresh out of boot camp, and this was his first real combat mission. He had trained on Mars, where the thin atmosphere and extreme cold had taught him to function in hostile environments. As he helped evacuate civilians from one of the prison buildings, he came face to face with a group of terrified Zilani children who had been separated from their parents days earlier. "Don't be scared," he said gently, his voice carrying through the translation device. "My name is Hyunwoo, and I'm here to take you home. Do you want to see your mom and dad again?" The children nodded eagerly, and Private Kim felt his heart break. As he realized how young they were, some couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old in human terms. The idea that anyone would deliberately terrorize children this young filled him, the cold anger that would fuel his actions for the rest of the battle. The liberation of the prison camps was happening, simultaneously across the entire continent. Human Marines, trained to operate in extreme environments, moved through the Korthok defenses with devastating efficiency. The alien guards, accustomed to intimidating helpless prisoners, found themselves facing soldiers who had learned warfare on a planet where survival itself was a daily battle. Within 6 hours of the first landing, every major population center was either completely liberated or under assault by human forces. The Korthok ground troops, who had never faced serious resistance during their centuries of conquest, discovered that they were completely unprepared for this kind of fighting. The humans didn't just fight to win, they fought with a personal intensity. That came from seeing what had been done to innocent people, every destroyed artwork, every separated family. Every act of cruelty inflicted on the Zilani became fuel for the human assault. All sectors reporting successful civilian evacuation came the report over the tactical communication network. Korthok resistance is collapsing across all fronts. Sergeant Major Shin looked out over the liberated camp, where human medics were treating wounded Zilani while engineers worked to restore basic services. "Good work, everyone, but we're not done yet. There are still people who need our help." The defeat of the Korthok fleet at the Zilani homeworld sent shockwaves across the entire galaxy. For 300 years, the Korthok Empire had been the most feared military force in known space. They had conquered over 200 worlds, enslaved dozens of species, and built their reputation on the simple fact that they had never lost a major battle. Until today, Captain Unili's destroyer, the UES Thunder, was badly damaged but still fighting as it chased the retreating Korthok ships. Half of her weapons were offline, her shields were completely gone, and smoke was filling several sections of the ship. But her crew kept fighting with the stubborn determination that had made humans famous throughout the galaxy. "Target that cruiser," she ordered her weapons officer, pointing at a Korthok ship that was trying to escape to hyperspace. "Don't let them get away." The Thunder's remaining guns fired one final salvo, and Captain Lee watched with satisfaction as another enemy vessel broke apart under the assault. "That's for every innocent person you hurt," she said quietly. "That's for every family you destroyed." The news of the human victory traveled faster than any spaceship could fly. Within hours, communication networks throughout the galaxy were buzzing with reports of the impossible battle. A human fleet of 57 ships had attacked a Korthok stronghold defended by 600 vessels, and had not only survived but won decisively. Unoccupied worlds across former Korthok space, enslaved populations who had lived in fear for generations, suddenly began to hope again. The myth of Korthok invincibility had been shattered by a species that most of the galaxy still considered to be newcomers to. Interstellar politics. The human broadcasts were being transmitted on every frequency, in every known language. Admiral Park's message was simple but powerful. The Korthok Empire is not invincible. They can be defeated. They can be driven from your worlds. All it takes is the courage to stand up and fight for your freedom. These words sparked uprisings on 17 different worlds within the first day. Enslaved populations who had endured decades of oppression suddenly began coordinating resistance movements. Factory workers sabotaged military equipment. Miners refused to work. Entire cities declared their independence from Korthok rule. The cascade effect was devastating to the Empire's structure. The Korthok had built their entire system of control on fear and the belief that resistance was hopeless. When that belief was destroyed, their ability to maintain order collapsed almost overnight. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, the U's Valor, surveying the damage from the battle. His ship looked like it had been through a war, which it had. Burn marks covered the hull. Several weapon turrets had been completely destroyed, and emergency repair crews were working around the clock to keep basic systems operational. But they had won, against impossible odds, with inferior numbers and firepower. The human fleet had broken the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The cost had been high. They had lost 11 ships and over 3,000 crew members, but the victory was complete. "Sir," reported Ensign Dojan Seo from his position at the communications console, "we're receiving surrender requests from garrison commanders throughout Korthok space. So far, 17 different worlds are asking to negotiate terms for peaceful withdrawal." Admiral Park considered this information carefully. The Korthok military structure was highly centralized, which meant that the defeat of their main fleet had left their scattered garrisons without clear leadership or support. Local commanders were now faced with the choice of fighting hopeless battles against newly inspired resistance movements or negotiating their own surrender. "What are they offering?" Park asked. "Standard terms," SEO replied. "They want to maintain control of their military equipment and be guaranteed safe passage back to their home territory." The Admiral's expression hardened. "Tell them the terms are simple and non-negotiable. Complete withdrawal from all occupied territories, full reparations for every enslaved population, including payment for forced labor and cultural destruction. And they surrender all military equipment to the local populations they've been oppressing." Commander Hannah Kim looked up from her damage assessment reports. "Admiral, what if they refuse these terms? Some of these garrison commanders might decide to fight rather than accept such complete defeat." Admiral Park's smile was not friendly. The expression on his face was the same one that Korthok prisoners would later describe as terrifying in their official statements. "Then we keep fighting until they change their minds. We have 17 worlds asking for our help with liberation, and I'm not planning to disappoint them." The communications officer began transmitting the Admiral's terms to the surrendering garrisons. The message was clear. The humans were not interested in negotiating a comfortable defeat for the Korthok. This was to be a complete victory for freedom with no compromises. Within hours, reports began coming in from across the former empire. Garrison after garrison was accepting the human terms then faced the prospect of fighting both local resistance movements and possible human intervention. The Korthok Empire, which had seemed invincible just days earlier, was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a priority message from Earth Fleet Command. They want to know our status and whether we need reinforcements." Admiral Park looked out at the Zilani homeworld, where human and alien relief workers were cooperating to rebuild what had been destroyed. "Tell them we're doing fine, but they might want to start preparing more ships. I have a feeling we're going to be very busy for the next few years." 6 weeks had passed since the last Korthok ship fled from Zilani space, and the transformation of the planet was remarkable. Dr. Minji Han walked through what had once been a destroyed medical district, now bustling with activity as construction crews worked to rebuild everything the invaders had torn down. The sight filled her with a deep sense of satisfaction. That made all the danger and sacrifice worthwhile. What amazed her most was watching human and Zilani engineers working together on the reconstruction projects. The two species had completely different approaches to technology and architecture, but somehow their collaboration was creating something better than either could have achieved alone. Human practicality combined with Zilani artistic vision was producing buildings that were both beautiful and incredibly functional. The Zilani had a natural gift for creating elegant solutions that looked like works of art. The humans brought knowledge of how to make things strong enough to survive in hostile environments. Together, they were building a city that could withstand anything nature might throw at it, while still maintaining the beauty that made Zilani culture so special. The response from the rest of the galaxy had been mixed. The Galactic Council had officially praised the human intervention and formally recognized the liberation of the Zilani homeworld. But Dr. Han could sense the nervousness in their official statements. The galaxy's newest members had just proven they could defeat one of its most feared military powers, and that made some species very uncomfortable. Many alien diplomats were privately wondering what this meant for the balance of power in the galaxy. If humans could destroy a 300-year-old empire in a matter of days, what did that say about their own defenses? Some species were already reaching out to establish closer relationships with Earth, while others were quietly beginning to strengthen their own military forces. Elder Vextai had become something of a celebrity among his people for his role in coordinating the refugee evacuation and rebuilding efforts. When he approached Admiral Park during a tour of the reconstructed cultural center, his expression was filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern that had become familiar to the human officers. "Admiral," the elder said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen his entire world nearly destroyed, "how can my people ever repay the debt we owe to humanity? You saved our civilization when no one else in the galaxy was willing to help." Admiral Park stopped walking and turned to face the elder directly. This conversation had happened several times over the past few weeks, and his answer was always the same. "You don't owe us anything, Elder. We did what anyone should do when they see people in trouble. But the cost to your people, ... Elder Vexti gestured toward a memorial wall that had been erected in the center of the district. The black stone surface was covered with names written in both human and Zilani script. The servants who had given their lives during the liberation battle, honored alongside Zilani civilians who had died protecting their families and culture. Admiral Park followed the elder's gaze to the memorial. Over 3,000 human names were carved into that wall, representing crew members who would never see Earth again. Each name represented someone's child, parent, spouse, or friend. The weight of those losses would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Freedom always costs something," Admiral Park said quietly, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had made difficult decisions in impossible situations. "The question isn't whether there will be a price to pay. The question is whether you're willing to pay it when the time comes." Captain Yuna Lee approached them, her left arm still in a medical sling from injuries sustained during the final space battle. Her ship, the UES Thunder, was currently in dry dock undergoing extensive repairs. But she had refused to take medical leave until the reconstruction efforts were well underway. "Sir," she said, holding a communication tablet in her good hand, "I thought you should see the latest reports from our intelligence network. We're receiving requests for military assistance from 47 different systems that were formerly under Korthok control. Word is definitely getting around about what happened here." Admiral Park took the tablet and scrolled through the messages. Each one told a similar story. Populations that had been enslaved for decades were now rising up against their oppressors. Inspired by the human victory at the Zilani homeworld, local resistance movements were coordinating uprisings, and many were specifically requesting human military support to complete their liberation. The Admiral looked out over the rebuilt city where human and Zilani children were playing together. In parks that had been bombing craters just weeks earlier, former slaves were working as free citizens, building new lives and new hopes for their families. The transformation was proof that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter how high the cost. "Well, Captain," he said, handing the tablet back to her, "I guess we'd better get back to work. The galaxy is a big place, and there are a lot of people who still need our help." As news spread that the human fleet was preparing to depart for their next mission, the Zilani government announced plans for a permanent monument to commemorate the liberation. The ceremony was attended by representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had never seen humans in person before. The monument itself was a perfect example of the collaboration between human and Zilani cultures. Its base was built from the same reinforced materials used in human military construction, designed to survive anything the universe might throw at it. Rising from this foundation was a graceful spire of traditional Zilani, crystal work that captured and reflected light in patterns that seemed to dance and move. The inscription was carved in every known galactic language, but the words were simple, enough that anyone could understand their meaning. When no one else would come, the Deathworlders answered. They reminded us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, carrying hope to their next destination, the legend of humanity's first great intervention was already spreading across the galaxy. The universe had learned that there was now a species willing to fight for the freedom of others, regardless of the odds against them.